What if you have misunderstood rebirth completely? What if you are not born again because the universe keeps sending you back, but because something inside you still refuses to let go? A desire you never completed, an attachment you still call mine, a karmic pattern that keeps asking for another chapter. The ancient teachings describe a moment when all of this finally becomes still. No more chasing, no more becoming, no unfinished hunger demanding another life. And when that moment comes, something happens that the ordinary mind can barely imagine. You are not given a better lifetime. You are not sent back to try again. The wheel simply stops. And for the first time after countless beginnings, you don't return. 1. You keep returning because something within you still belongs to this world. Look carefully at the things you are most afraid to lose, not the things you say matter, the things whose disappearance would make you feel as though a piece of you disappeared with them. A person, a relationship, a reputation, a dream, a position, a memory, a version of yourself you fought years to become. Hidden beneath almost every deep attachment is one quiet prayer: please stay. We rarely say it aloud, but we build entire lives around it. We look at someone we love and silently ask them not to change. We finally become successful and secretly ask success not to leave. We receive admiration and begin fearing the day people stop noticing us. We find comfort and immediately begin protecting it. We experience one beautiful season of life and whisper, "Let tomorrow look like this too." And there is nothing wrong with loving what life gives you. The problem begins when love becomes a demand for permanence, because everything you are trying to hold exists inside change. The face you love will change. The body you protect will change. The home you built will change. The people who praise you will change. The dreams that once kept you awake at night may one day mean nothing to you. Even the person you currently call me is changing while you are reading these words. And yet something inside us keeps saying, mine, my person, my life, my success, my body, my future, my story. Hold it, protect it, do not let it disappear. This is where attachment becomes more than love. Love says, I am grateful you are here. Attachment says, I cannot be at peace if you leave. There is an enormous difference. Love can open the hand. Attachment closes the fist. And the tighter the fist becomes, the more frightened we become of losing what is inside it. This is why attachment and fear are so closely connected. You cannot desperately possess something without eventually becoming afraid of its disappearance. And perhaps this reveals something profound about samsara. According to ancient Indian spiritual traditions, rebirth is not simply a cosmic punishment. You are not necessarily dragged back into existence because some distant force refuses to let you leave. The deeper teaching is more unsettling. Something within consciousness may still be reaching toward experience, still wanting, still grasping, still identifying, still saying, one more person, one more achievement, one more pleasure, one more chance, one more identity. One more life in which everything might finally become exactly as I want it. Imagine standing at the doorway of a house that is disappearing behind you. Your feet have already stepped outside. Your body has already left, but your hands are still wrapped around the frame. You say you are leaving, yet everything within you is still holding on. What happens then? You remain bound to what you have physically left. Perhaps this is why death alone cannot represent liberation. Death can remove the body, but death does not automatically answer the deeper question, has the grasping ended? A person can leave a relationship and carry that relationship inside them for 20 years. The person is gone, the attachment remains. You can lose money and continue worshipping money. The money is gone, the hunger remains. You can lose status and spend the rest of your life remembering the days when people respected you. The status disappeared, the identity did not. Physical separation and inner release are not the same thing. And if that is true even within one lifetime, the ancient sages asked a much greater question. What happens when the body itself is left behind, but the deeper momentum of craving has not become still? What happens when the hands have disappeared, but the grasping remains? This is where karma, desire, attachment and rebirth become connected. Not as punishment, as momentum. A wheel continues turning because movement has already been given to it. The river continues flowing because water is still moving toward somewhere. A fire continues burning because fuel is still being offered. And the mind continues becoming because it still believes there is something ahead that will finally complete it. You do not need to believe anything about another lifetime to witness this machinery. Watch yourself for one ordinary day. The mind says, if I can just get this, I will finally be happy. You get it. For a moment, something becomes quiet. Then the mind looks around and finds the next thing. You wanted more money. You received it. Now you fear losing it. You wanted recognition. People finally noticed you. Now you need them to keep noticing. You wanted someone to choose you. They chose you. Now you are afraid they might choose differently tomorrow. You wanted to become successful. You succeeded. Now someone more successful appears, and suddenly your achievement feels smaller. The object changes. The hunger survives. That sentence is worth remembering. The object changes. The hunger survives. And if the hunger survives every object it consumes, perhaps the answer was never another object. This is the trap. We spend years changing what we desire without examining the one who is constantly desiring. We think, maybe the next thing will be different. The next relationship, the next achievement, the next house, the next spiritual experience, the next version of ourselves. But the same hungry mind enters every new room. It rearranges the furniture, changes the names, changes the faces, changes the dream, and begins the cycle again. Desire, pursuit, possession, fear, loss, pain, new desire, new pursuit, new possession, new fear, again and again and again. This is samsara happening before death. Small births, small deaths, small rebirths. You become somebody, then life destroys that identity. You suffer, then you construct another. You find something. You call it yours. You become attached. Life changes. You lose it. Then you begin searching again. And perhaps the great wheel of rebirth cannot be understood until you recognize this smaller wheel turning inside you every day. Because samsara is not merely about returning to another body. It is the endless movement of becoming. The feeling that what you are right now is not enough. That somewhere else, with someone else, after achieving something else, you will finally arrive. But you never arrive, because the destination keeps moving. And eventually, the spiritual question changes. Instead of asking, what else do I need? You begin asking, why does something within me always need something else? That question opens a different door. Because liberation cannot simply mean finally receiving everything you desire. Imagine receiving every single thing you have ever wanted, every person, every pleasure, every achievement, every experience. Would desire disappear forever? Or would the mind eventually create another desire? If satisfying desire permanently ended desire, humanity would have discovered liberation through consumption thousands of years ago. But we already know what happens. Enough becomes normal. Then normal becomes insufficient. The mind asks for more. So liberation must begin somewhere deeper than satisfaction. It begins when you stop asking temporary things to perform an impossible task. You stop asking another human being to make you permanently complete. You stop asking success to prove your worth. You stop asking possessions to protect you from impermanence. You stop asking tomorrow to guarantee what today cannot keep. And something extraordinary begins happening. You can still love, perhaps you love even more deeply. But now love sounds different. It no longer says, "You belong to me, therefore you must never leave." It says, "You are here now, and because you are here now, I will love you fully." You can still enjoy success, but you no longer ask success to tell you who you are. You can still build, still dream, still create, still care, still participate completely in this strange and beautiful human experience. But your hands begin opening. You stop trying to turn moments into possessions. You stop asking people to become permanent. You stop treating change as though existence has betrayed you. You begin understanding something the grasping mind could never understand. A thing does not need to last forever to be sacred. A person does not need to remain forever for their presence to have mattered. A beautiful moment does not become meaningless because it ended. A flower does not fail because it eventually falls from the branch. The sunset is not tragic because darkness follows it. Its disappearance is part of what makes you look, and perhaps life becomes most beautiful when you finally stop demanding that it stay. This is detachment, not indifference, not coldness, not running away from the world. It is loving without chains, holding without imprisoning, experiencing without possessing, being grateful without demanding permanence. And every time you live this way, something inside you becomes lighter. One attachment loosens. One fear loses its authority. One old identity becomes less convincing. One desperate hand opens. Until perhaps, one day, there is nothing left that needs to grip the doorway. The world may still be beautiful. People may still be precious. Life may still move through pleasure and pain. But somewhere deep within you, the ancient demand has become quiet. Nothing here needs to become eternal for you to be whole. Nothing temporary needs to promise permanence. Nothing outside you needs to complete what was never truly incomplete. And perhaps that is when the mystery of liberation begins. Not when the world disappears, but when your need to possess the world disappears. Because maybe the soul does not stop returning when it finally gets everything it wanted. Maybe it stops returning when it finally understands why it kept wanting. And when the final hand opens, when the final mind becomes silent, when nothing within you is begging the temporary to become eternal, the doorway is no longer a prison. You can finally leave without looking back. Not because you stopped loving this world, but because you finally learned how to love it without belonging to it. 2. Your deepest attachment is not to people or things, it is to who you think you are. There is something you may be holding more tightly than money, more tightly than relationships, more tightly than your possessions, more tightly than life itself. And because it is always with you, you rarely recognize it as an attachment. It is the person you believe yourself to be. Your identity, your story, your name, your history, your wounds, your achievements, your failures, your importance, your place in the minds of other people. We spend years trying to release our attachment to the world while quietly protecting the one attachment sitting at the center of everything, me. Look carefully at how often this word silently enters your suffering. They rejected me. They ignored me. They embarrassed me. They replaced me. They misunderstood me. They did not appreciate me. Life did not give me what I deserved. The event may last a few minutes, but the identity can carry it for decades. Someone says something painful to you when you are 20. You remember it when you are 50. The voice that spoke the words may have disappeared from your life long ago. But the person inside you who was wounded that day is still alive, still defending itself, still waiting for an apology, still asking the past to become different. The event ended, but the me created around the event continued. And this is where spiritual attachment becomes incredibly subtle, because we do not only become attached to pleasant identities, we become attached to painful ones too. I am the one who was abandoned. I am the one nobody understood. I am the one who always sacrifices. I am the one who failed. I am the one who was betrayed. I am the one life treated unfairly. At first, these are descriptions of experiences. Then, without noticing, they become definitions of ourselves. Pain becomes memory, memory becomes story, story becomes identity, and eventually identity begins protecting the very wound we claim we want to heal. Because if the wound disappeared completely, who would you be without the story you have told yourself about it? This is a frightening question. Sometimes people hold on to suffering because suffering has become familiar. The pain hurts, but at least it tells them who they are. Without it, there is an unfamiliar emptiness. No villain to blame, no old battle to continue, no identity to defend, only space. And the ego is often more frightened of empty space than it is of familiar suffering. This is why letting go can feel like dying. You think you are releasing a memory, but something deeper feels threatened. You are releasing the person you became because of that memory. And suddenly you begin to understand why the ancient search for liberation was never merely about abandoning possessions. You can give away everything you own and still carry an enormous self inside you. You can live in a cave and spend every day thinking about how spiritually advanced you have become. You can reject wealth and become proud of having rejected wealth. You can stop seeking ordinary status and begin seeking spiritual status. You can stop wanting people to call you successful and start wanting them to call you enlightened. The costume changes. The actor remains obsessed with the role. The ego is extraordinarily adaptable. It can make an identity out of almost anything, even humility, even detachment, even suffering, even spirituality. It can whisper, "I am more awake than them. I understand what they cannot understand. I have suffered more. I have sacrificed more. I am different." And suddenly the spiritual path itself becomes another mirror in which the ego admires its reflection. This is why the deepest teachings do not simply ask you to improve your identity, they ask you to investigate it. Who exactly is this person you have spent your entire life defending? At first, the answer seems obvious. You say your name, but you were given your name. You existed before you understood it. So are you the name? You point toward your body, but your body has been changing since the day you were born. The face you had at 5 years old is gone. The body you had at 15 is gone. Even now, your body is changing in ways you cannot see. So if the body changes continuously, what exactly do you mean when you say, "This is me"? Perhaps you point toward your thoughts. But thoughts come and go. You have believed things in the past that you no longer believe. You have wanted things you no longer want. You have feared things that no longer frighten you. If every thought were truly you, then you would become a different self every time your mind changed. Perhaps you say, "I am my memories." But memories fade. Some change. Some disappear. There are entire days of your childhood you cannot remember. Were you somehow less yourself during the moments you later forgot? Go deeper. Are you your profession? That can disappear. Your relationship? That can change. Your reputation? That exists inside other people's minds. Your success? That can be surpassed. Your failure? That happened to you. But must it become you? Keep removing everything that can change, everything that can be lost, everything that was given to you, everything other people can take away. Eventually, the mind becomes uncomfortable because it has spent an entire lifetime collecting answers to the question, "Who am I?" And now every answer is being questioned. But perhaps this discomfort is not a problem. Perhaps it is the doorway. Ancient sages did not ask, "Who am I?" because they wanted a more impressive description. They asked because they suspected that the deepest truth could not be contained inside any description. Something has been present while every version of you has come and gone. Think about yourself as a child. That child had a different body, different fears, different dreams, different understanding of the world. Then adolescence came, another version appeared, then adulthood, another. And even within adulthood, how many versions of yourself have already disappeared? The person you were before heartbreak, the person you were before success, the person you were before losing someone, the person you were before discovering something that changed how you saw life. They appeared, they lived, they disappeared. Yet somehow you say, that was me. What knows that? What is aware that change occurred? There is a difference between a thought and the awareness of thought. A thought appears, you know it appeared. An emotion rises, you know it is present. Sadness comes, something recognizes sadness. Fear comes, something knows fear is here. Even when you say, I am confused, something is aware of the confusion. The ancient contemplative traditions turned toward this mystery. Instead of endlessly studying everything appearing inside consciousness, they began asking about consciousness itself. What is the one who sees? Not the eyes. The eyes are seen, not the thought. Thought is noticed, not the emotion. Emotion is experienced. What is aware of all of it? This question cannot be answered merely by collecting more words, because every answer the mind produces becomes another object appearing in awareness. And perhaps this is where the identity you have defended begins to loosen. You realize that you have mistaken the contents of your life for the essence of what you are. Imagine standing before a mirror your entire life and believing you are the reflection. When the reflection looks beautiful, you feel valuable. When the reflection looks tired, you feel diminished. When someone praises the reflection, you feel powerful. When someone insults it, you suffer. Your entire existence becomes dependent upon protecting what appears in the glass. Then one day, something extraordinary becomes clear. The reflection is not the one looking. Your identities may be reflections. Your personality may be a reflection. Your social role may be a reflection. Your story may be a reflection. Real within the experience of this life. Important within this life, but perhaps not the deepest truth of what is looking through them. This is why the ego fears genuine self-knowledge, because the ego wants to become permanent. It does not necessarily want liberation, it wants immortality for itself. It wants spirituality to promise, you will remain exactly who you think you are forever. It wants the name to survive, the story to survive, the identity to survive, the sense of separateness to survive. It wants eternity, but it wants eternity on its own terms. And what if liberation offers something far greater than that? What if it does not make the prison eternal? What if it reveals that you were never merely the prisoner? Imagine a wave rising from the ocean. For a brief time, the wave has a form, a height, a direction, a beginning. It can look at another wave and say, "You are there, I am here." If the wave could think, perhaps it would become deeply attached to its shape. It might spend its entire existence trying to remain exactly as it is. It might compare itself with larger waves, fear smaller waves becoming larger, feel proud when the sunlight makes it beautiful, feel ashamed when it begins to collapse. And eventually it would discover the terrifying truth every wave must face. The form cannot remain, but suppose, just before collapsing, the wave recognized something. I am not merely this shape. I am water. Suddenly, the ending means something different. The wave is still allowed to be a wave. Its form still matters while it exists. Its movement is real. Its beauty is real. But its deepest nature was never confined to the temporary boundary it was desperately trying to protect. This is one way to approach the mystery of liberation. Not as the destruction of something precious, but as the ending of mistaken identification. The temporary does not need to be hated. The personality does not need to be destroyed. Your name does not become meaningless. Your human life does not become worthless. You simply stop demanding that the temporary identity carry the weight of eternity, and something becomes lighter. You no longer need every person to understand you, because their misunderstanding cannot define the deepest part of you. You no longer need every argument to end with your victory. You no longer need to protect an image of perfection. You can say, "I was wrong," without feeling as though your entire existence has collapsed. You can be forgotten without believing you have become nothing. You can watch an old version of yourself disappear without desperately rebuilding it. And perhaps this is one of the most beautiful forms of inner death, to allow yourself to die psychologically before the body dies physically. Not literally, but to let identities finish when their time has finished. The wounded you, the admired you, the rejected you, the successful you, the failed you, the version of you that needed someone else's approval, the version that needed revenge, the version that needed the world to know what happened. Let them complete their season. You do not have to carry every former version of yourself into every future moment. A tree does not chase its fallen leaves. It releases them because their season is complete, and perhaps the soul becomes lighter in the same way. Not by collecting better identities forever, but by becoming less frightened of releasing them. This brings us back to rebirth, because what is rebirth if not another becoming, another form, another identity, another experience through which the ancient question of separation, desire, attachment, and selfhood continues? If something within consciousness still desperately says, "I must become," "I must experience," "I must possess," "I must prove," "I must continue as this separate self," then the wheel still has fuel. But what happens when that demand becomes completely silent? What happens when consciousness no longer mistakes the costume for the wearer? When the actor no longer forgets itself inside the role? When the wave no longer believes its temporary shape is its entire existence? Then perhaps there is nothing left that needs another identity in order to discover what it is. And this may be the deeper reason the final attachment is so difficult to release. You are not merely letting go of something you possess. You are letting go of the one who says, "This is mine." Not destroying yourself, not becoming nothing, but seeing through the boundary you once believed was absolute. And perhaps the soul does not become free when it finally creates the perfect version of itself. Perhaps freedom begins when it no longer needs another version, no better mask, no greater title, no more impressive story, no final identity capable of surviving forever. Only the recognition that beneath everything you have called me, something was present before the story began. Something watched every chapter change. Something remained while countless versions of you appeared and disappeared. And when that recognition becomes complete, the deepest attachment begins to fall. Not attachment to the world, attachment to the one who believed the world belonged to them. Because perhaps the last thing the soul releases before it no longer needs to return is not the world. It is the illusion of the separate self that was trying so desperately to hold it. 3. Karma does not end when you have suffered enough. It ends when nothing within you creates another chain. There is a comforting idea many people carry about karma. If you suffer enough, eventually your debt will be paid. If enough painful things happen to you, perhaps the universe will finally decide. That is enough. You have learned your lesson. But karma is much deeper than punishment. And suffering alone does not necessarily free you, because you can suffer and become bitter. You can be betrayed and become obsessed with revenge. You can lose everything and become even more attached to what remains. You can experience pain for 20 years and still emerge carrying the same anger, the same fear, the same identity, and the same craving that existed before the pain began. Pain does not automatically become wisdom. Sometimes pain simply becomes another chain, and this changes everything about how we understand karma. In the ancient traditions of India, Karma is not merely a cosmic system that rewards good people and punishes bad ones. The word itself points toward action. Action born from intention. Action that produces consequences. Action that leaves impressions. Action that shapes what comes next. And some of the most powerful consequences of your actions are not happening somewhere far away. They are happening inside you. Every action teaches the mind something. Every reaction leaves a trace. Every repeated choice makes the next similar choice easier. Become angry often enough, and anger begins arriving before you consciously invite it. Feed jealousy long enough, and eventually you can enter a room and immediately notice who has more than you. Practice resentment, and the mind becomes skilled at finding reasons to resent. Lie repeatedly, and truth begins feeling uncomfortable. Live for approval, and eventually silence from other people feels like rejection. But the same principle moves in another direction. Practice patience, and a small space begins appearing between provocation and reaction. Practice compassion, and you begin seeing suffering where you once saw only irritating behavior. Practice truthfulness, and honesty slowly becomes more natural than deception. Practice generosity, and the frightened voice saying, "There will never be enough," begins losing some of its power. This is karma becoming visible in a single lifetime. You act. The action leaves an impression. The impression becomes a tendency. The tendency influences the next action. The next action strengthens the tendency, and eventually you stop feeling as though you are choosing. You simply say, "This is who I am." But perhaps it is not who you are. Perhaps it is what you have practiced. That distinction is enormous, because what has been practiced can be understood. What has been strengthened can stop being fed. What has become automatic can eventually be seen, and what can be seen clearly no longer has to control you unconsciously. This is where karma becomes something far more profound than destiny. It becomes momentum. Imagine pushing a wheel. One push makes it move. Then you push again and again. Soon the wheel is turning so quickly that you stand back and say, "Look how powerful this wheel is." But you forget something. You have been feeding its movement. Human beings do this constantly. Someone hurts you. Anger appears. That anger is painful. So you replay what happened. Every replay becomes another push. You imagine what you should have said, another push. You imagine what you will say when you see them again, another push. You tell 5 people what they did, another push. You check whether life has punished them yet, another push. Years later, you say, "I don't understand why I still feel this." Because the original event happened once, but inside you, it happened 1,000 times. The person may have wounded you once. Memory continued the work. This is how an event becomes a pattern. And patterns are powerful because eventually they begin recreating the conditions that keep them alive. A person who expects betrayal may begin seeing betrayal everywhere. A person terrified of abandonment may cling so tightly that relationships become suffocating. A person who believes nobody respects them may interpret disagreement as humiliation. Then they react. The reaction creates consequences. Those consequences seem to prove the original belief, and the wheel turns again. This is why spiritual freedom requires more than waiting for karma to disappear. You have to stop unconsciously creating new chains while trying to escape the old ones. Otherwise, while one fire is burning out, you are standing beside it, throwing in more wood, and then asking, "Why won't the fire die?" Perhaps this is one of the deepest reasons human suffering repeats. We want freedom from consequences while remaining attached to the patterns producing them. We want peace without releasing resentment. We want love without releasing control. We want freedom without releasing identity. We want forgiveness without releasing the story of being wronged. We want the wheel to stop while continuing to push it. And this is where the spiritual path becomes uncomfortable, because eventually you cannot blame everything on the past. The past may explain your wounds. It may explain your fear. It may explain why certain reactions became natural. But there comes a moment when awareness gives you a new responsibility. Now you can see the wheel. Will you push it again? Someone insults you. For 1 second, there is a space. A very small space. Anger is there. The old response is ready. The words are already forming. But something inside you sees what is happening, and in that tiny moment, karma is no longer completely unconscious. You have discovered a doorway. You can repeat the pattern, or you can allow the pattern to end with you. That moment may look insignificant from the outside. Nobody applauds. No light appears around you. The universe does not announce that a great spiritual event has occurred, but inwardly, something enormous has happened. A chain was offered another link, and you did not add it. This is how freedom begins. Not always with a dramatic awakening, sometimes with one reaction you refuse to repeat, one resentment you stop feeding, one old story you no longer rehearse, one temptation you finally observe without obeying, one argument where you realize winning is not worth losing your peace, one moment where the old self says, "Do what you always do," and awareness quietly answers, "No." That no can interrupt years of momentum, but there is an even deeper layer, because karma is not created only through obvious harmful actions. Attachment to good actions can also strengthen the sense of self. You help someone, then you wait for gratitude. You sacrifice. Then you secretly keep a record. You give. Then you feel hurt when nobody recognizes your generosity. You forgive. Then you begin seeing yourself as morally superior to the person you forgave. Even goodness can become another decoration for the ego. This does not make goodness meaningless. It makes intention important. Ask yourself, can you do something beautiful without needing it to become part of your identity? Can you help without needing to be known as helpful? Can you give without turning generosity into evidence of your superiority? Can you love without secretly creating a debt the other person must repay? Can you do the right thing even when nobody notices? This is where action begins becoming lighter. The action remains, but the psychological ownership around it weakens. I did this. I deserve this. They owe me. I should be rewarded. I should be recognized. These are small sentences, but they can become enormous chains, because the ego rarely performs an action and leaves it where it happened. It carries the action forward. It builds a story around it. I was the one who helped them. I was the one who sacrificed. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who suffered. I was the good one. And suddenly, yesterday's action has become today's identity. Then today's identity begins demanding tomorrow's reward. The wheel turns. This is why some ancient teachings place such importance on action without attachment to the fruits of action. Not because outcomes are irrelevant, not because you should stop caring whether your work succeeds, but because there is a difference between caring deeply about what you do and making your inner freedom dependent upon receiving the exact result you imagined. You can plant carefully, water faithfully, protect the soil, give the seed everything it requires, but there comes a point where your hands must open. You cannot scream at the earth until the seed grows faster. You cannot command the rain. You cannot negotiate with the seasons. You participate completely, and then you release what was never entirely under your control. This is extraordinarily difficult for the ego. The ego loves control because control makes it feel secure. It says, if I do everything correctly, life must give me the result I deserve. But life does not sign that agreement. You can love someone deeply and they can still leave. You can work honestly and still fail. You can make wise choices and still experience loss. You can be kind and still be misunderstood. And if your peace depends upon reality, rewarding every good action exactly as you expected, then even goodness becomes another form of bondage. Freedom asks something greater. Do what is right because it is right. Love because love is worthy of being lived. Give because something within you understands generosity. Speak truth because you no longer want to divide yourself through deception. Walk away when staying would betray what you know is right. Stay when leaving would merely be fear disguised as wisdom. Act fully, but do not turn every result into a verdict on your existence. Success does not make you more real. Failure does not make you less real. Praise does not increase your deepest worth. Criticism does not erase it. The result arrives. You meet it. You learn. Then you continue without dragging yesterday behind you like a chain. This is how action begins losing its power to bind. And perhaps now we can understand something about liberation. The end of karma does not mean the liberated person becomes lifeless. It does not mean they never act again. Life continues moving. The heart beats. Words are spoken. Food is eaten. People are helped. Decisions are made. Responsibilities are fulfilled. But something has changed at the center. The old machinery of grasping is no longer operating in the same way. Action does not constantly become another monument to me. Experience does not constantly become another identity. Pleasure does not immediately become possession. Pain does not automatically become resentment. Praise does not need to be preserved. Failure does not need to become shame. Life passes through, and the hands remain open. Imagine writing on water. For a moment, there is movement. Then the surface becomes still again. Now imagine carving into stone. The action may take only seconds, but the mark remains for years. Most of us carve almost everything into ourselves. One insult, stone; one rejection, stone; one failure, stone; one betrayal, stone; one victory, stone; one compliment, stone. We carry thousands of inscriptions, then wonder why we feel heavy. A freer consciousness begins becoming more like water. Not because nothing matters, but because everything does not need to become permanent. An experience comes. It is met fully. The lesson is received. Then the experience is allowed to pass. No shrine built around the pain. No throne built around the success. No identity constructed around either one. Just life moving through life. And perhaps this is how karmic momentum finally weakens. Not because someone somewhere erases your cosmic record. Not because you have been punished enough. But because the machinery that continuously produces bondage has become still. The fire is no longer receiving fuel. The wheel is no longer being pushed. The old echo is no longer being answered. And eventually, even the strongest momentum must fade. This may be why the question, how much karma do I have left, misses something important. A better question might be, what am I creating now? What are you feeding today? What reaction are you strengthening? What identity are you rehearsing? What resentment are you keeping alive? What desire are you teaching your mind it cannot live without? What action are you performing solely because you need someone else to confirm your worth? Every moment is not simply the consequence of what came before, it is also the birthplace of what may come next. And that means your freedom does not begin in some distant future lifetime. It begins at the exact point where awareness interrupts momentum, where you stop, see, understand, and refuse to add another link, again and again, until the chain that once seemed endless has nowhere left to continue. Perhaps this is what makes liberation so extraordinary. You do not defeat karma by fighting every consequence the universe sends you. You become free by understanding the mechanism that keeps creating bondage. And once the mechanism is completely understood, there may come a moment when nothing new is being added. No new grasping, no new identity built around the action, no new hunger demanding continuation, no new chain waiting to become another chain. The old momentum completes itself. The wheel slows. The fire consumes its remaining fuel. And then comes a silence, the grasping mind has never known. Not the silence of punishment, not the silence of exhaustion, the silence of completion, because karma does not finally lose its hold when you have suffered enough. It loses its hold when suffering can no longer turn you into another prisoner, when pleasure can no longer purchase your freedom, when action can happen without becoming another identity, and when nothing within you keeps creating the very chains you are asking liberation to break. 4. The final lifetime begins when you stop trying to escape life and finally see through it. There is one final trap waiting for almost every person who begins searching for liberation. It sounds spiritual, it sounds wise, it can even sound like detachment. But underneath it, the old hunger is still alive. I want to escape. Escape suffering, escape disappointment, escape attachment, escape the world, escape another lifetime, never come back. At first, this seems like the opposite of desire. But look carefully. The person desperately chasing pleasure says, I need this experience. The person desperately chasing escape says, I need to never experience this again. One is running toward the world, the other is running away from it. But both are still running. Both are still being controlled by what they are running toward or away from. And this is why the desire for liberation can become another attachment. You can become attached to not being attached. You can desire the end of desire. You can build an identity around having no identity. You can reject the world so intensely that the world still occupies your entire mind. And perhaps the final lifetime does not begin when you become disgusted with life. Perhaps it begins when you finally stop fighting life, not because everything becomes pleasant, not because suffering disappears, not because the people you love stop leaving, but because you begin seeing existence without constantly demanding that it become something else. This is much harder than escaping. Imagine holding a beautiful flower. You know it will eventually wither. Attachment says, do not change. Stay exactly like this. I need your beauty to remain. Fear says, if you are going to disappear, I should never love you. Wisdom says something entirely different. You will not remain, and I will love you completely while you are here. That is freedom. Not refusing the flower, not imprisoning the flower, receiving it, seeing it, loving it. And when its season is complete, allowing it to fall. Most of us were never taught how to love this way. We were taught that love means holding. If someone matters, keep them. If something makes you happy, preserve it. If a moment is beautiful, try to repeat it. If an identity brings admiration, protect it. So we spend our lives trying to freeze a river. Then we suffer because the river continues moving. Life never promised stillness. Everything you see is already changing. The person beside you is changing. The body you woke up in this morning is changing. The house around you is slowly changing. The relationships you depend upon are changing. The world outside your window is changing. Even the thoughts passing through your mind while hearing these words are appearing and disappearing. Nothing stays. And yet we repeatedly interpret change as though life has personally betrayed us. How could this happen? How could they change? How could this end? Why couldn't it remain the way it was? But perhaps the deeper question is, why did we expect the temporary to behave as though it were eternal? A wave rises because it will fall. A season arrives because another season will replace it. A flower opens because its petals will one day return to the earth. Your childhood appeared and disappeared. Your youth appears and disappears. Every version of you eventually gives way to another. Impermanence is not something that occasionally interrupts life. Impermanence is how life moves. Without change, nothing could be born. Nothing could grow. No wound could heal. No ignorance could become wisdom. No grief could soften. No mistake could be corrected. No night could become morning. The same law you curse when it takes something away is the law that allowed that thing to appear in the first place. This is why seeing life clearly changes your relationship with loss. you begin to understand that something ending does not mean it was meaningless. This is one of the cruelest lies attachment tells us. If it ended, it failed. But is a sunset a failure because darkness follows it? Is childhood meaningless because you could not remain a child? Is a conversation worthless because it eventually became silent? Is a flower pointless because it could not bloom forever? No. Its temporary nature does not erase its beauty. Sometimes its temporary nature reveals its beauty. Imagine if every sunset remained permanently frozen across the sky. Eventually, you would stop looking. Imagine if every beautiful moment lasted forever. Eventually, it would stop feeling like a moment at all. We recognize precious things partly because we know they can disappear. And once you understand this, gratitude becomes deeper. You stop loving life because you believe you can keep it. You love life because it is here. Now, this breath, this morning, this person sitting beside you, this opportunity to say what needs to be said, this chance to forgive, this chance to begin again, this chance to look at someone you love before one of you becomes a memory. We spend so much time preparing for the next moment that we fail to notice the miracle of the one already happening. The mind says, when I finally reach that place, I will live. When I meet the right person, I will live. When I have enough money, I will live. When I heal completely, I will live. When my problems disappear, I will live. And years pass, the future keeps moving ahead of you, until one day you realize something frightening. The life you were waiting to begin was the life that was passing while you waited. This is another form of samsara, always becoming, never being, always somewhere else, never here, always preparing to arrive, never realizing that existence has been happening beneath your feet the entire time. The spiritual path interrupts this movement. It asks you to stop for one moment, not physically, inwardly. Stop asking this moment to become another moment. Stop asking yourself to become someone else before you are allowed to exist fully. Stop demanding that reality first satisfy your conditions. Look, listen, feel what is actually here, and you may discover something astonishing. Much of your suffering is not coming from the moment itself. It is coming from the argument you are having with the moment. This should not be happening. They should not have left. I should be further ahead. My life should look different. I should still have what I lost. Perhaps some of those thoughts are understandable. Some circumstances genuinely should change. Wisdom does not mean tolerating injustice or refusing to improve your life. Acceptance is not passivity. You can accept that a fire is burning and still put it out. You can accept that someone is harming you and still walk away. You can accept that you made a mistake and still correct it. Acceptance simply means seeing what is actually happening before your mind begins replacing reality with what it wishes were happening. Only then can you respond clearly. Resistance says, this cannot be. Wisdom says, this is. Now what is the right response? There is enormous freedom in that difference, because you stop wasting your life fighting facts that have already occurred. The past happened. You can learn from it. You can repair what can be repaired. You can apologize. You can forgive. You can change direction. But you cannot return to yesterday and negotiate with it. And yet millions of people spend today trying to rewrite yesterday inside their minds. If only I had, if only they had, if only I knew. Again, again, again. The body lives in the present. The mind keeps returning to a world that no longer exists. And then we wonder why we feel trapped. Freedom begins when you allow what has ended to be finished, not forgotten. Finished. There is a difference. You can remember without remaining imprisoned. You can carry wisdom without carrying the wound in the same way. You can honor someone who is gone without refusing to live because they left. You can learn from failure without making failure your identity. You can remember the person you once were without needing to become them again. The lesson remains. The chain does not have to. And as this understanding deepens, your relationship with pleasure changes too. You stop being frightened of beautiful experiences simply because they are temporary. Some people become so afraid of attachment that they begin withdrawing from everything. They call it peace, but sometimes it is fear. If I don't love deeply, I cannot be hurt deeply. If I don't care, I cannot lose. If I expect nothing, nobody can disappoint me. That may protect you from certain pain, but protection is not always freedom. A locked room can be safe. It can also be a prison. True detachment does not require a closed heart. It requires an open hand. That distinction matters. A closed heart says, I will not love because you might leave. An attached hand says, I love you, therefore you cannot leave. An open hand says, I love you, I do not own you, and because I know nothing is guaranteed, I will not waste your presence pretending it is permanent. That kind of love is terrifying to the ego, because the ego wants contracts with life. It wants guarantees. It wants to know, will this person stay? Will this success last? Will I remain healthy? Will everything be okay? But existence gives very few guarantees, so the ego tries to manufacture them. It clings, controls, predicts, plans obsessively, reads signs into everything, replays conversations, attempts to secure tomorrow before tomorrow arrives, and in trying to protect itself from uncertainty, it sacrifices the only thing it actually possesses, this moment. Perhaps this is why the person approaching liberation becomes less obsessed with controlling life, not careless, not irresponsible, simply less convinced that control can save them from impermanence. They still plan, but plans do not become gods. They still love, but love does not become ownership. They still build, but buildings are not mistaken for eternity. They still experience grief, but grief is allowed to move. They still feel joy, but joy is not commanded to stay. Everything is received, everything is respected, everything is allowed its season. And this creates a kind of peace the grasping mind cannot understand, because the grasping mind thinks peace will arrive when nothing unwanted ever happens again. Wisdom discovers peace while change is still happening. That is completely different. Anyone can feel peaceful when everything obeys them. But if your peace exists only when life agrees with your preferences, then life still owns your peace. One unexpected phone call can take it. One rejection can take it. One financial loss can take it. One person changing their mind can take it. One diagnosis can take it. One failure can take it. Then was it really freedom, or merely favorable circumstances? The deeper peace does not depend upon the ocean becoming perfectly still. It comes from learning not to demand that every wave stop. You learn to move with what arrives, not blindly, not weakly, consciously. A wave rises, you meet it. A wave falls, you release it. Another comes, you meet that too. And somewhere along the way, you stop spending your entire life begging the ocean to behave differently. This is what it means to see through life rather than escape it. You see pleasure clearly, beautiful, temporary. You see pain clearly, difficult, temporary. You see praise clearly, pleasant, temporary. You see criticism clearly, uncomfortable, temporary. You see youth clearly, precious, temporary. You see the body clearly, extraordinary, temporary. You see every identity you have worn, useful, temporary. Then something inside you begins asking less from temporary things. You no longer demand eternity from them, and because you demand less, you can finally experience them more fully. This is the paradox. Detachment does not remove you from life. It can bring you closer to life than attachment ever allowed. Attachment rarely sees what is actually present. It sees what it might lose. You are sitting with someone you love, but part of your mind is afraid they may leave someday. You have success, but part of your mind is afraid it may disappear. You are healthy, but part of your mind is already imagining sickness. You finally receive what you wanted, but immediately begin protecting it. So even possession contains fear. Detachment says, "This is here now. Let me actually be here with it." And suddenly life becomes vivid. Not because it became permanent, because you stopped looking away from the present toward the imagined moment of its disappearance. Perhaps a liberated consciousness sees the world this way, not as something disgusting that must be escaped, not as something seductive that must be possessed, but as something seen completely, a passing appearance, a sacred experience, a field in which consciousness discovers what attachment cannot teach. The world no longer needs to be conquered, and it no longer needs to be rejected. It can simply be what it is. And this may be why the final lifetime, if such a thing can be spoken of, would not necessarily look like someone desperately waiting to die. Perhaps it would look like someone finally capable of living, fully, without trying to make every moment permanent, without needing every person to complete them, without asking tomorrow to promise anything, without dragging yesterday into every new morning. They might laugh, love, work, rest, create, grieve, watch the rain, hold someone's hand, eat when hungry, sleep when tired, help where help is needed, and beneath all of it, something remains open. Nothing is being turned into a prison. Nothing is being asked to last forever. Nothing is being used to prove, "This is who I am." Life happens, and life is allowed to pass, like clouds through an endless sky. The sky does not chase the beautiful cloud. It does not fight the dark one. It gives both enough space to appear and enough space to disappear. Perhaps freedom is something like that. Not controlling what appears, not becoming everything that appears. Simply knowing that whatever appears does not have to become another chain. Then even death begins to look different. Because if you have spent your life practicing possession, death appears as the ultimate thief. It takes the body, the possessions, the relationships, the status, the name, everything you called mine. But if you have spent your life learning to release, death may no longer be the first time your hands are asked to open. You have been opening them your entire life. You have already watched identities die, already released old versions of yourself, already learned that love can remain meaningful without possession, already discovered that endings do not erase what was beautiful, already learned that what comes must eventually go. Then perhaps physical death is not an entirely foreign movement. It is the final expression of a truth life had been quietly teaching you from the beginning. Nothing here can be held forever, and maybe liberation begins when that truth no longer frightens you, when you do not need to escape the world, and you do not need to keep the world. When you can stand between those two desires with completely open hands. No chasing, no fleeing, no bargaining, no demand that life become permanent before you allow yourself to love it. Then the world loses one of its deepest powers over you. Not because the world changed, because the one looking at it changed. You finally see what attachment could never allow you to see. Life was never asking to be possessed. It was asking to be experienced. People were never yours to keep, they were yours to meet. Moments were never yours to freeze, they were yours to live. The body was never promised forever. It was given for this journey, and perhaps the soul does not become ready to leave because it has grown tired of existence. Perhaps it becomes ready because it has finally stopped asking existence for something existence was never designed to give: permanence. And when you stop demanding permanence from the temporary, when you stop escaping pain and chasing pleasure as though either one could define you, when you stop trying to imprison every beautiful thing inside the word mine, something becomes extraordinarily quiet. You are still here. Life is still moving. The world is still changing. But the struggle against change has begun to end. And perhaps that is when the final lifetime truly begins. Not when you decide you never want to return, but when there is nothing left inside you desperately trying to stay, and nothing left desperately trying to escape. 5. When every desire, attachment, and illusion falls away, there is nothing left to bring you back. And now we arrive at the question behind everything, the question that has been waiting beneath every lesson. What actually happens when the soul no longer needs to be reborn? Not when you become tired of life, not when you have suffered enough, not when you simply wish never to return, but when the deepest causes of bondage have finally become still, when attachment no longer owns you, when karma no longer creates another chain, when the temporary self is no longer mistaken for the whole of what you are, when nothing within you is desperately chasing another experience in order to become complete. What happens then? The human mind immediately wants an answer it can picture. A place, a realm, a light, a destination. We imagine the soul leaving the body and traveling somewhere beyond the stars, perhaps to another world, perhaps to some perfect dimension, perhaps to an eternal place where suffering can never reach it again. We want liberation to look like the greatest journey we have ever taken, but there is a problem. A journey requires a traveler, a destination requires distance, and the deepest teachings of liberation ask a far more unsettling question. What if the one desperately asking, "Where will I go?" is part of the illusion that must finally be understood? This is where words begin to fail, because words were created inside the world of separation. Here, there, before, after, me, you, birth, death, arrival, departure. But liberation points towards something that may not fit neatly inside those categories. Different Indian philosophical traditions describe the ultimate nature of liberation differently. Some emphasize realization of the deepest self. Some speak of freedom from karmic bondage. Some understand liberation through relationship with the divine. And some describe the end of the ignorance that made separation appear absolute. But they meet around one extraordinary idea. The cycle does not need to continue forever. There can be freedom from samsara. And perhaps the most important thing is not imagining where the liberated soul goes. Perhaps the most important thing is understanding why it no longer needs to return. Think about everything we have uncovered. Why does the wheel continue? Because there is movement. Why is there movement? Because there is craving, attachment, identification, karmic momentum, the ancient feeling, I am incomplete. And from that one feeling, an entire universe of desire can arise. If I am incomplete, I need something. If I need something, I must pursue it. If I pursue it, I become attached to the result. If I receive it, I fear losing it. If I lose it, I suffer. If I suffer, I begin seeking something else. And the wheel turns. One desire becomes another. One identity becomes another. One chapter becomes another. One beginning follows another ending. We call this life. The ancient traditions looked deeper and saw samsara. But what happens when the original misunderstanding disappears? What happens when consciousness no longer begins from I am incomplete? Then desire changes, not ordinary preference, not the natural movement toward food when hungry or shelter when cold. Something deeper disappears, the desperate existential hunger that says something outside me must make me whole. Imagine spending your entire life searching for a treasure. You cross mountains, you lose friends, you travel through storms, you become old while searching. Everywhere you go, people tell you, perhaps it is over there, so you continue. Another mountain, another country, another teacher, another promise. Then one day, exhausted, you reach into the pocket of the coat you have been wearing since the journey began. And the treasure is there. It had been there the entire time. What happens to the search? You do not have to force yourself to stop searching. The search stops because the reason for searching has disappeared. That distinction is everything. If someone simply commands you, stop desiring, desire may remain beneath the surface. If someone says, stop being attached, you may become attached to appearing detached. If someone says, "Stop searching," you may spend years trying to become the person who no longer searches. But when you recognize directly that what you were searching for was never truly separate from you, the movement can end naturally. There is nowhere else you need to arrive in order to become whole. And perhaps this is why liberation cannot be reduced to discipline alone. Discipline may prepare the mind. Ethical living may purify action. Meditation may create clarity. Self-inquiry may expose illusion. Wisdom may loosen attachment. But the final freedom is not another possession added to the person. It is not a trophy placed on top of the ego. I have achieved enlightenment. I have obtained moksha. I have become spiritually superior. The moment liberation becomes another possession, the old collector has returned. The ego can collect spiritual achievements just as easily as it collects money. It can become proud of silence, proud of simplicity, proud of renunciation, proud of knowledge, proud of having fewer desires than everyone else. And then the prison becomes beautifully decorated, but it remains a prison. True freedom must therefore go deeper. It must reach the one who keeps collecting, the one who keeps becoming, the one who keeps saying, more. And when that one is finally seen clearly, perhaps the entire structure begins to collapse. Not violently, quietly. Like a dream losing its power when you wake. While dreaming, everything seems completely real. You run, you fear, you protect yourself. You lose something and grieve. You find something and rejoice. Then you wake. Notice what happens. You do not need to destroy the dream. You do not need to defeat every enemy inside it. You do not need to solve every unfinished problem. You do not need to travel to the edge of the dream world and escape through a hidden door. You wake. And awakening changes your relationship with everything that appeared inside the dream. Perhaps liberation has something of this quality, not the destruction of existence. The destruction of confusion about existence, not hatred of form. Freedom from mistaken identification with form, not the annihilation of truth, the ending of illusion. This is why the metaphor of the wave and ocean has survived for so long. Imagine a wave rising from an endless sea. For a moment it has a distinct form. It can be measured. It has a beginning, a height, a direction. From its own perspective, if it could think, it might say, "I am this wave. That wave is another. The ocean is beneath us." It might compare itself. "That wave is larger. That one is more beautiful. That wave lasted longer." It might become proud when it rises high. It might become frightened when it begins to fall. And eventually, the wave reaches the moment it has feared from the beginning. Its form begins disappearing. If the wave believes it is only the form, this looks like annihilation. But what was the wave made of? Water. Before the wave rose? Water. While the wave appeared separate? Water. When the wave fell? Water. The wave did not need to travel somewhere else to find the ocean. It never left. Only the temporary form created the appearance of separation. Now imagine the wave suddenly recognizing this before it falls. What happens to its fear? The form will still change, but the meaning of that change has transformed completely. I am not merely this temporary shape. This is not a perfect explanation of liberation, and different traditions would qualify the metaphor differently. But it reveals why moksha can be so difficult for the ordinary mind to imagine. The ego asks, "What happens to me?" Wisdom asks, "What exactly is this me you are afraid of losing? Your name? That was given to you. Your body? That has been changing since birth. Your thoughts? They appear and disappear every day. Your memories? Some have already vanished. Your social identity? That exists partly in the minds of other people. Your personality? Even that has changed across the years. Which one of these is the permanent traveler you are trying to preserve? Go deeper and deeper. Eventually the mind reaches a place where ordinary answers become insufficient. And perhaps that silence is not failure. Perhaps it is honesty. There are truths that cannot be understood merely by adding another sentence. Sometimes the mind has to become quiet enough to recognize what language has been pointing toward. This may be why the deepest spiritual teachings often become simpler as they approach the end. At first, there are explanations, practices, concepts, maps, philosophies, distinctions. But eventually, there is only seeing. You were attached. You saw attachment. You were controlled by desire. You saw desire. You mistook every thought for yourself. You learned to witness thought. You built identity around pain. You watched identity loosen. You acted from craving. You learned to act without clinging so tightly to the fruit. Layer after layer becomes visible, and every layer that becomes completely understood loses some of its power to imprison you, until perhaps there is nothing left to uncover. No hidden bargain with life. No secret demand that the universe make you permanent. No unfinished identity asking to be completed. No resentment requiring another chapter. No hunger saying, one more experience and then I will finally be whole. What happens to the wheel then? It slows. Not because someone outside the wheel reaches down and stops it, because there is no longer anything pushing it. This is one of the most beautiful ways to understand liberation. A fire does not need to be punished into going out. Remove the fuel. Eventually the flame becomes still. A wheel does not need to be destroyed. Stop pushing it. Its remaining momentum completes itself. A search does not need to be violently abandoned. Find what you were truly searching for. The search ends. And perhaps samsara ends in the same profound way. The causes of continuation are no longer being renewed. No new chain, no new grasping, no new becoming born from the belief that you are fundamentally incomplete. The movement completes itself. Then there is a question almost everyone asks. Does this mean you become nothing? But perhaps nothing and something are still categories created by the same mind, trying to imagine what lies beyond its ordinary framework. A wave might believe it has only two possibilities: remain a wave forever or become nothing. It cannot imagine that the boundary it is defending may never have been absolute. This is why liberation should not be casually described as disappearance, nor should every Indian tradition be forced into one explanation. The traditions disagree about profound metaphysical questions, but what matters for our journey is the freedom they point toward. Freedom from compulsive becoming, freedom from karmic bondage, freedom from ignorance, freedom from the endless wheel, and suddenly the phrase on the thumbnail becomes much deeper. You don't return. At first, those words sound almost frightening. You don't return. No familiar world, no new childhood, no new identity, no another chance to walk beneath the sun. But perhaps the fear comes because we are hearing those words through attachment. We imagine the universe taking life away, yet liberation is not life being stolen. It is bondage ending. Imagine someone released from a prison after forgetting that a world exists beyond its walls. Would you say, how terrible, they will never return to their cell? No. The fact that they do not return is the freedom. But there is an even deeper truth. You do not need to wait for death to begin discovering what this freedom means, because the wheel turns inside you now, every day. You wake up and yesterday's identity returns. Yesterday's resentment returns. Yesterday's fear returns. Yesterday's desire returns. Yesterday's need for approval returns. The body wakes once, but psychologically, we can be reborn into the same suffering hundreds of times. Someone hurt you 5 years ago. You remember it this morning. The wound is reborn. Someone rejected you. You replay the conversation. The rejected self is reborn. Someone once made you feel insignificant. You spend your life trying to become successful enough to prove them wrong. The old identity is reborn through every achievement. This is why the question of rebirth is not only a question about what happens after death, It is a question about what you keep bringing back to life today. What inside you keeps returning? The same anger? The same person in your thoughts? The same craving? The same comparison? The same fear that you are not enough? The same desperate need to be understood? The same old story about what happened to you? Every time you unconsciously repeat it, the wheel turns. But every time you see it completely and refuse to feed it, something changes. Perhaps today one resentment does not return. Perhaps tomorrow one fear loses its authority. Perhaps one identity you have carried for 20 years finally becomes unnecessary. Perhaps you forgive someone, not because what they did was acceptable, but because you are finished allowing their action to live inside you. Perhaps you stop chasing someone who cannot love you the way you need. Perhaps you stop demanding recognition for the good you do. Perhaps you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Perhaps you look at your past and finally say, "That happened to me, but it does not have to keep becoming me." These are small liberations, tiny endings of samsara within a single life. And maybe every genuine ending teaches you how freedom feels. Not dramatic, not loud, just lighter. Something that used to pull you no longer pulls. Something that used to trigger you passes through without taking possession of your mind. Something you once desperately needed becomes optional. Someone's opinion that once controlled your entire day becomes only an opinion. And you realize, I am still here. This is how the hands open, one finger at a time. Until perhaps the final spiritual freedom is simply the completion of a movement you have been practicing your entire conscious journey. Release. Release the need to control. Release the need to possess. Release the demand to be remembered. Release the identity built around suffering. Release the spiritual identity that wants to be special. Release even the obsession with becoming liberated. Because if liberation becomes the final thing you desperately need, desperation is still alive. The deepest surrender may happen when even the seeker becomes quiet. No bargaining with existence. No saying, "I have meditated enough, give me freedom." No saying, "I have suffered enough, let this be my last life." No cosmic negotiation, only clarity, only understanding, only the complete ending of what created bondage. And then perhaps something becomes possible that language can only circle around. The one who spent lifetimes searching finally recognizes what the search could never provide. Wholeness was not waiting at the end of another desire. Peace was not hiding inside another possession. Truth was not contained inside another identity. What you were searching for could never be obtained by becoming more and more. It required seeing through the one who always believed more was necessary. And when that belief disappears completely, what would another birth accomplish? What lesson would another identity need to learn? What possession would another pair of hands need to grasp? What applause would another ego need to hear? What wound would another lifetime need to heal? What destination would another seeker need to reach? Nothing is missing. Nothing is waiting to complete you. Nothing is calling the old hunger forward. The fire has no fuel. The wheel has no push. The doorway has no hand gripping its frame. The wave no longer fears the ocean, and the seeker no longer needs another road. This is why liberation is not merely the end of rebirth. It is the end of the reason rebirth was necessary. That is much deeper. Because if you merely stop something while its cause remains, the cause will seek expression again. But when the cause itself disappears, there is nothing left to restart the movement. And so perhaps the final moment is not dramatic at all. Perhaps there is no cosmic announcement, no voice saying, "You have completed the journey." Perhaps there is only an unimaginable stillness, the stillness of something that no longer needs to become. For so long, consciousness moved toward experience, toward possession, toward identity, toward answers, toward another beginning. And now, nothing pulls, not because nothing matters, because nothing is missing. This is the difference. The ordinary mind hears emptiness. The liberated mind discovers completeness. The ordinary mind hears, "You don't return," and imagines loss. Wisdom hears, "You don't return," and understands that there is no unfinished chain left to bring you back. And perhaps this is the greatest mystery of all. The journey that appeared to be taking you through countless experiences may have been leading toward one recognition. You were never going to become complete through the world. The world was revealing the incompleteness of the one who believed it needed to possess the world. Every desire showed you the hunger. Every loss showed you the attachment. Every relationship showed you where you were still trying to possess. Every wound showed you where identity had formed. Every ending whispered the same truth. You cannot keep what was never permanent. And every beginning gave you another opportunity to understand, until one day, perhaps the lesson is no longer needed. You see completely, and what is seen completely no longer needs to repeat itself. Then the ancient wheel that seemed endless reaches its natural end. Not because you defeated life, not because you escaped creation, not because you became worthy of disappearing, but because nothing remains that needs another beginning. No unfinished hunger, no identity desperate for continuation, no attachment demanding permanence, no karmic chain asking for another link, no illusion convincing the wave that it is separate from the ocean. The journey is complete, and perhaps, for the first time, there is no next destination, because the truth was never somewhere else. After all the searching, all the wanting, all the holding, all the losing, all the becoming, the soul no longer asks, "What comes next?" It no longer needs another answer, another identity, another lifetime. The wheel becomes still, the hands finally open. And when nothing within you needs to return, you don't return. Not because existence has rejected you, but because the reason for returning is gone. Perhaps the greatest freedom is not knowing what comes after death. It is reaching a place within yourself where nothing is left unfinished, nothing is desperately held, and nothing needs another lifetime to make you whole. When desire becomes still, attachment releases its grip, and the illusion of separation finally falls away. The wheel no longer needs another turn. You don't return because there is nothing left pulling you back. If this journey awakens something within you, subscribe to the Silent Vedas and share in the comments. What is the one thing your soul is still learning to release? Until we meet again, live deeply, hold lightly, and remember, freedom begins the moment you stop asking the temporary to become eternal.